Welcome to the Stratix Enterprise Mobility Insights podcast, where we talk about mobile technology in business, education, and healthcare. Whether it's new trends, new products, or better ways to do things, our goal is to give you useful information that'll make your organization better. Today, we're talking about the value of a comprehensive endpoint management strategy. Here's your host, Stratix Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Partnerships, Gina Daniel Lee.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, our topic is endpoint management. There's a few things that come to my mind when I think about endpoint management, mostly around security and how it really helps to automate IT tasks. But really, unified endpoint management is a lot more and can do so much more than that. My guests today are Chris Reed, Director of EUC Technology Strategy, and Steve Dejarnett, Director of Product for Security Solutions from EUC by Broadcom. Hi, guys. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Gina. Thanks for having us.
So, Chris, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll send it over to Steve.
Wonderful. So, Christopher Reed. I work in the field office of the CTO here at the EUC business unit, and get the opportunity to interface with a lot of our customers and work on their strategy and really help them make life better for their users. So, thanks for having me.
Great.
I'm Steve Dejarnett. I lead product management in EUC for our security solutions, helping our customers achieve and deliver a more secure endpoint environment for their users.
It's really great to have you guys. Thanks so much again for joining us. Let's start at the very basic level. Why is unified endpoint management better than traditional old MDM?
Traditional MDM. We've been managing devices for years, and we've called it a lot of things, from MAM, which is application management, to EMM, to MDM, to many other acronyms we can come up with. What's important and differentiating about UEM is that word, unified, because we're not just managing devices. UEM gives us a unique opportunity to move beyond just managing a thing and allows us to manage the entirety of an experience for a person. So in a way, we're managing a user's experience across a multiplicity of devices rather than just managing a mobile device or a desktop or a thin client or something of that sort.
You know, it also moves beyond the mobile context of MDM, right? We're now talking about, as Chris said, any device the user has, desktop devices, Windows, Mac, Linux, as well as their iOS, Android, Chrome OS devices. Basically anything you're going to carry around with you to try to do your job, to try to get work done, we can do that. And we can also take a more 360-degree view of the user. So as Chris said, you know, ensuring not only that you've got a device that can access the resources, but assessing, is that user having a good experience on those devices? Are there problems perhaps with the technology or the applications that are making their experience not as good? And being able to surface that and highlight it. And then finally, for administrators, you know, think about the consumer simple experiences we have when we go buy a new phone, we go get something else, right? It's so easy to get set up and running. And we're trying to bring those consumer simple experiences to the enterprise as well.
I like that. And that is really helpful because, you know, to me, I think all the acronyms, you know, that we've heard over the years really make it a little bit confusing, but that was really helpful. But Steve, dumb it down just a little bit more even. What does it mean for IT operations?
Yeah, well, I think at its heart, what we're trying to do is help streamline and create consistency in work and in service delivery. You know, using the same tools, the same processes, regardless of platform. Not doing Windows one way, Mac a different way, iOS a third way, and Android a fourth way. And also bringing together the security and employee experience teams that are now not just other groups in your organization, they're now your stakeholders and your partners as you try to deliver the seamless, secure, high quality end user experience to your users.
You know, one of the things you said there was bring together those teams. I really think that's the most important aspect of this. To me, this is much like another advent of virtualization, not from a technology or topology perspective, but from an organizational perspective. I remember walking into conference rooms, in the early 90s, and everybody introducing themselves and having a storage team who has been there for 6 years and a compute server team who had been there for equal amounts of time, not at all even know who each other were. And what we're seeing now is much the same thing. Is desktop engineering is getting in the same room with those who have traditionally delivered mobile apps. And I think that bringing together that Steve mentioned is one of the most important thing. This is really a great opportunity to streamline under a banner of delivering end user services rather than being the storage guy or the server guy or the mobile guy or the Windows guy or the Mac guy. We're really seeing a lot of change there. And it's not as visible in many organizations as the server was in the virtualization world, but it's really starting to create friction in organizations that are not as flexible and how they're approaching that. So it's probably a good time to really kind of look at those groups, who's in charge of them, how can we help them move things along further. To me, that's really the biggest impact for IT operations. But then the opportunity that Steve represented of streamlining in a consistent model, it's very much worth the effort to get there.
I never really thought about it, bringing the organization together as well, and really creating that holistic UEM strategy for the whole entire organization. Talk to me a little bit about that, Steve.
Yeah, I think all the things we've just talked about play into this. But if I were to try to pull it all together, right? You don't manage devices because you don't have anything else to do. You manage devices because you want to provide secure access to your applications and data. And really, you want to enable the productivity of your employees. You want them to be able to get their jobs done easily and efficiently so they can do better, so they enjoy working at your company more because it's so easy to use the technology. You want them to be efficient. You want everything to be predictable. And that's where I think a UEM strategy can help you enable that. But you need to be thinking about that as you're building out that strategy.
Yeah, and that plays really closely into the zero trust moniker as well when it comes to thinking about your UEM strategy. Is now your security team needs to be more involved with your desktop and mobile team, but this gives you the opportunity from a zero trust perspective to do things from a network trust perspective that are directly connected to, is this device in a state where I want it to connect? And that is a really whole new paradigm that's available, and it only comes about when you bring together these disparate technologies into a unified framework. But the opportunity around zero trust is, not just two-factor authentication or multi-factor, but is real-time device state as part of that trust framework that can, ultimately reduce your company's risk significantly.
So we've been talking mostly about the impact to the organization, right? Let's switch our thoughts just a little bit to the end user. Like, how does UEM, what does that mean for the user experience, Chris?
It means more security, of course. Just knowing that you're protected. The world we live in today, like, you can get a text message and that text message is linked to a vulnerability that's known on your iPhone or your Android device, and within minutes, like, all your data is gone. And that could be personal and corporate if maybe you're doing a BYOD strategy. So it means more security for the individual. Here's the really great part, though. It also means that now there's a universal delivery framework, a radical self-service for that consumer, So the same sort of thought process it takes to open up an app store, get an app, do something with it, is the exact same thing you now do at work within the hub experience. So it's a greatly simplified experience, and when and if anything goes wrong, you have support right away. You don't have to wait for things. The help desk already knows what's happening, which application is misbehaving. Of course, no applications ever misbehave, but um, you also have the analysis and the predictability. It just, from an end user perspective and somebody who uses it every day, it makes my life simpler.
Yeah, I think the other piece of this is it makes it easier and faster to deploy new technologies, new applications, new solutions into the organization by having this framework on which you know which devices you have, you know their state and posture, by knowing your users and what they're entitled to and what they should have access to. It makes it very simple to deploy and make available new apps, new technologies, new resources to the user. It gives them a highly consistent experience. I don't have to think about, oh yeah, I'm going to use this application. What username and password do I have to remember here? Oh, this one uses a different MFA. Right? You can bring everything together so your end users don't have to think about the security that is in place to protect their access, right? When you do a UEM deployment correctly, most of the time security just stays out of your way. It's there, it's protecting you, but it's not the thing that is in your face every time you try to do something. And so being able to deliver that consistent, seamless, high quality experience is one of the great outcomes.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Chris, you touched on BYOD. We recently worked on a solution for a customer who wanted to let employees bring their own devices. Let's talk a little bit about Workspace ONE. How does that help enable a BYOD environment?
I think it's important for an organization to define what they mean by BYOD to start. So is it simply an ownership of like who purchased the device but it's going to be fully managed? Does it mean the device is registered but not managed? Does it mean you're just doing mobile application management? And I'm not trying to ask all the questions. There are many, many more. I'm just trying to say, if you're going to do BYOD, take the time up front to define what it means for you and your organization. Now, BYOD is more common, and it's a great advantage for users to be able to use a device that they use personally, have their corporate data available to them, and keep the two in their own lanes, and having the right security to ensure that they are protected from their organization as a user, and the organization is protected from the user's organization, and that they can work in harmony. That's really important. There's a lot of things to be defined in policy. When we talk specifically about Workspace ONE UEM, it is giving you a framework that makes all those things possible. Understanding what you want out of it, maybe you need a consultative conversation to get to that point and understand what your options are, like how many colors of red can you possibly choose for something. That's important, but Workspace ONE UEM is going to give you that flexibility.
Yeah, I think it also helps you as you go through the process Chris talked about, thinking about what are the applications and resources that you want to allow access to your users from a personally owned device. You might decide that there are some applications that are just not going to be appropriate to access from a personal device. The sensitivity is too high, or perhaps you can't enforce or require the posture necessary on that device to access the resources. So, thinking about your applications, thinking about the sensitivity, thinking about which ones are appropriate to access from a personal device, and then using that context and what do you want to allow people to do on their personal devices and what do you require from them can help you choose the different models that are appropriate, can help you assess what your users will be able to do on those personal devices and which things they're going to have to do on a corporate issued or managed device. And maybe in some cases that means you say, for some users, I have to issue them a new mobile device so that I can enforce the security, or I have to ask the user to trust me enough to apply full management onto that device, even though it's their personal device. Different choices, different environments. In some parts of the world, different regulatory schemes may drive you to one approach or another.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's just say that I'm a user out in the field and I have an issue with my device. Steve, how does UEM help with minimizing that downtime that I might experience?
Well, failure in the field is always going to happen and it's always a problem, right? The users, some are super technical and they can solve their own problems. Some are great at other things that they do in their life. That's what they're employed to do, but being a technology troubleshooter is not one of them. So, avoiding failure in the first place is your best strategy. How do you identify applications that need to be updated? Maybe you got a buggy version of an application that causes more problems in the field. So how can you identify that rapidly? Maybe stop rolling out a new version of an application because you're seeing issues in the field. So a product like Workspace ONE UEM can start to help give you visibility into what types of problems are you seeing. Can you correlate it back to an OS version, a particular type of hardware or an application? And so being able to identify those nascent but emerging issues can help you stop them from spreading, can help you stop the problem before it becomes a big widespread issue. And then if you do encounter problems and someone in the field needs support, it's a little expensive to send a human being out to stare over their shoulders. So with products like our Workspace ONE Assist problem, we can provide direct on-device help. Your user can connect to a trusted resource in your support team. They can see the device exactly as the user sees it themselves, so you can help them fix things on the fly and resolve problems faster.
We hear about resolving problems faster. There's a lot of goes on about artificial intelligence and AI these days. One of the real practical applications is our Workspace ONE Intelligence. It is looking at the environment. It is looking at your applications. It is collecting all the heuristics needed so that it can create a predictable model and tell you something that's very, very, very important from a data-driven perspective. And that is the user having a good time? Like, is it working well? Is it just okay? Or is it really bad? And if it's just okay, or it's really bad, like, what's the culprit, right? What is the fly in my soup? I need to know that. And sifting through all that for thousands or hundreds of thousands of devices, it's just not possible. So one of the greatest applications I've seen of artificial intelligence is being able to take that data, analyze it with an engine, and then be able to deliver directly back to those responsible and say, looky there, there's the fly in your soup. That's what is making things bad.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and UEM also allows for full application lifecycle management, right, Chris? What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so it's important to understand that it's unified. So it's not just application lifecycle for mobile devices, iOS and Android and Chrome and Linux, but also desktops like Windows and, of course, Linux and Mac OS X and all the platforms. And, our Vision Pro story is coming along great as well. So all of these things, it's very important from a security perspective to keep these apps up to date it's also important to understand when you're updating an app, what impact it's having, hence the intelligence mentioned a few moments ago. But what it's doing is it's allowing your users to have a consistent experience of, oh, look, I just got something new. It's updating. And that's on Windows or Mac or iOS or Android, but it is a universal framework. And that also goes back to why some of these teams need to come together. You're rolling out a new version of, I'll pick on Zoom, for example. Well, what type of application is Zoom? Well, it's a Windows app, right? I install it on Windows. Well, it's also a Mac app. I install it on the Mac. It also is a mobile app, iOS and Android. So that's part of bringing these teams together to create a unified experience, and not, I got a version of Zoom that worked great on my phone, but now it's crashing on my PC because something's not configured right. So it's a little bit around the application lifecycle management story, but it gives IT a much better feel of how to roll through that and do the ring topology with it. And then it just gives the user the ability to, Christmas morning or, look what I got, and do self-service as well. As you get older, your Christmas mornings are more self-service. Santa Claus doesn't come anymore.
Wow. That's a little disappointing,
dang,
but
Chris, I'm disappointed.
I know, me too. But I like the analogy, and Workspace ONE does a really great job of cross-pollinating across different OSs, which is really a valuable experience. Steve, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Chris hit all the high points, right? From an IT and from an end user perspective, keeping applications up to date, keeping track of issues, and keeping the app versions that have issues out of circulation, it just goes back to trying to keep IT and the technology experience from being a thing that your employees worry about, right? Just let them focus on doing their job, give them access to the resources, and leverage the tools that Workspace ONE UEM provides to get the latest versions of apps out when they're ready, to identify issues and maybe pull that back or push a later version out. See the problems before they become widespread, and make it so that your users kind of feel like, hey, I usually don't have a problem with technology. I'm just, my company's letting me focus on the thing that they hired me to do, which is to do my job, not to be an offshoot of IT and tech support.
Get easy. So UEM gives us a lot of data, and we love data. But how is all that data helpful in this scenario, Steve?
Yeah, and we've already talked about several examples of how data helps us identify issues with applications that are maybe misbehaving. But broadly speaking, it helps organizations identify issues, and it helps them identify what the new normal is. Every organization, every technology infrastructure is sort of a living, breathing entity, and it changes as time moves on. If you took a snapshot of what your organization looked like from a technology point of view 6 months ago and look at it now, right, you'd find all sorts of changes that have been made. And those are, in general, all good things. You're moving along, you're addressing security issues, you're deploying new applications and resources and improving things for your users. But this data also feeds your own AI and analytics capabilities to help you uncover new insights about what's happening in your environment, and bringing that context together. Bringing data in from multiple sources gives you a richer, fuller picture of what's happening, right? Instead of just saying, I know what's happening on a device, or I know this particular application because it's the thing I care about, right? If you're very myopic on those things, you'll know with deep details about one thing, but you'll lose the whole picture, and what your end users experience is the whole picture.
That makes perfect sense. So guys, as we wrap up here, any final nuggets of wisdom?
Let me take a first shot at it. We've talked a lot today about the fact that management, security, and experience are all kind of converging together now. It's not, again, it's both an organizational thing as well as a technology thing. So when you think about managing your devices, when you think about providing access to applications and data, recognize that, this is an opportunity to ensure that your users have the technology they need to do their jobs. They have appropriate access to the applications and data that they need, and you can build the security controls in, and that security doesn't necessarily have to be the sandpaper or the friction in your experience every day. When you build it in right, when you set things up correctly with unified endpoint management, it can help you create a better experience and a more secure environment for your users.
That's great.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I recently had a conversation with an individual, and they were adamant that they had to get this environment under management. And I said, absolutely, we can help you with that. We'll get them under management. Let me ask you a question. So what is it about them you want to manage? And we had a good 45 seconds of silence. So I think governing your outcomes of what it is you're trying to accomplish when you approach this. Do you need unified endpoint management? I mean, yes, of course, a modern business does. Do I need experience management to understand what my users are doing? I think, yes, of course, a modern business does. But understanding what outcomes you need by when will streamline the process with those of us who love to spend time on keyboard to get things done, to give you the results you want. It's not just, well, let's get everything under management and we're going to be great. It's what outcomes are you after? Let us communicate in that framework, and then we'll help you drive those outcomes.
That makes a lot of sense. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed our conversation. A lot of good nuggets of wisdom through our conversation, and I appreciate you being part of the podcast today. Maybe you'll come back?
Look forward to it. Thanks, Gina.
Great.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Stratix Enterprise Mobility Insights podcast. If you like what you heard today, please share it and visit stratixcorp.com/podcast to subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode.